The massive diamondback rattlesnake struck without warning, its fangs sinking deep into 17-year-old Evangeline Morrison's ankle as she gathered wildflowers near Broken Creek. Her screams echoed across the Texas prairie, reaching the ears of Dr. Joseph Running Bear, who was collecting medicinal herbs barely a quarter-mile away. What happened next would shatter every social boundary in the frontier town of Cedar Ridge and force a Cherokee healer and a ranch owner's daughter into a sacred bond that neither wanted, yet neither could escape. This is the story of how an ancient ritual, prejudice deeper than hatred, and a love that defied every law of man and nature transformed two lives and an entire community forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 1887 had been the hottest on record in central Texas, the kind of scorching heat that made even the hardiest ranchers question their sanity for settling in such an unforgiving land. The grass had turned brittle and yellow weeks earlier, and waterholes that had never run dry in living memory were reduced to cracked mud and the bones of desperate cattle. It was the kind of summer that made people do foolish things, take risks they would never consider in gentler seasons. Dr. Joseph Running Bear understood the dangers of such heat better than most. At 32, he had spent the last 8 years serving as the only medical practitioner within 50 miles of Cedar Ridge, though the town's white population preferred to think of him as something less than a real doctor. His medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania meant nothing to people who saw only his Cherokee heritage, his long black hair braided with traditional beads, and the buckskin medicine bag that never left his side. Joseph had learned to live with their prejudice, just as his grandfather had taught him to live with the changing seasons, accepting what could not be altered while working steadily to heal those who needed healing, regardless of their opinion of his heritage. His small clinic on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge served primarily the Mexican vaqueros, freed slaves and other outcasts who couldn't afford the white doctor in the county seat 30 miles away. But Joseph's reputation as a healer transcended the social barriers that otherwise defined his existence. When children fell ill with fever, when ranch hands suffered broken bones or rattlesnake bites, when complications arose during childbirth that the local midwives couldn't handle, even the most prejudiced families found their way to his door. They might not respect him as a man, but they respected his ability to save lives when no one else could. On this particular afternoon, Joseph was gathering ingredients for a medicine that might help combat the effects of prolonged heat exposure. The prairie grass hid many useful plants for those who knew how to look, and his Cherokee grandmother had taught him to read the subtle signs that revealed where healing herbs grew strongest. He was focused on his work, moving carefully through the tall grass, while keeping alert for the rattlesnakes that grew increasingly aggressive during extreme heat. That's when Evangeline Morrison's screams shattered the afternoon silence. Joseph dropped his gathering basket and ran toward the sound, his medical training overriding every other consideration. Through the shimmering heat waves, he could see a young woman writhing on the ground near the creek bed, her white dress stark against the brown grass. Even from a distance, he could see the distinctive coiled shape of a large rattlesnake retreating into the rocks nearby. Evangeline Morrison was the only daughter of Samuel Morrison, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties and unofficial leader of Cedar Ridge's business community. At 17, she was considered the most eligible young woman in the region, destined to marry into one of the other prominent ranching families and solidify the social alliances that governed frontier society. She was also dying. Joseph reached her within minutes of the strike, but already he could see the characteristic swelling beginning around 2 distinctive puncture wounds just above her ankle. The snake had been large, probably carrying enough venom to kill a grown man, and Evangeline's slender frame would process the toxin even more rapidly. "Miss Morrison," Joseph said, dropping to his knees beside her and immediately beginning his assessment. "I'm Dr. Running Bear. I need you to stay as still as possible." Evangeline's eyes were wide with terror and pain, but she managed to focus on his face. "The snake!" she gasped. "It was so big and it happened so fast." Joseph was already opening his medicine bag, extracting the tools and remedies he would need. "I saw it. Diamondback, probably 6 feet long. You're going to be all right, but I need to work quickly." He looked directly into her eyes, his voice carrying the calm authority that had reassured hundreds of patients over the years. "Do you trust me?" It was a loaded question. Joseph knew exactly who Evangeline Morrison was, just as she undoubtedly knew his reputation as the Cherokee doctor who lived on the margins of respectable society. In normal circumstances, she would never have spoken to him, let alone allowed him to touch her. But these were not normal circumstances. "Yes," Evangeline whispered, her voice already showing the effects of the spreading venom. "Please help me." Joseph began working with the focused intensity that had earned his medical degree despite the prejudice of his professors. First he used his knife to make small incisions around the bite wounds, allowing the venom-contaminated blood to flow more freely. Then he applied a poultice made from plants in his medicine bag, ingredients that his Cherokee grandmother had taught him to use for snake bites, combined with techniques he had learned in medical school. "This is going to hurt," he warned, before beginning to draw out as much venom as possible, using a technique that combined traditional Cherokee healing with modern medical knowledge. Evangeline bit down on the leather strap he offered her, tears streaming down her face, but never asking him to stop. As Joseph worked, he could hear the sound of approaching horses. Someone had heard Evangeline's screams and was coming to investigate. Joseph's heart sank as he recognized the voices. Samuel Morrison and at least 3 other men, probably ranch hands armed and dangerous in the way that frontier men always were when they encountered situations they couldn't control. "Evangeline!" Samuel Morrison's voice carried across the prairie, filled with the panic that any parent would feel hearing their child's cries of distress. Joseph continued working, knowing that he had only minutes before the treatment would be interrupted. He applied pressure bandages to control bleeding, then began preparing a mixture of herbs that would help Evangeline's body fight the remaining venom. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as his mind raced through the implications of what was about to happen. Samuel Morrison arrived with 3 ranch hands, all armed and all looking like men prepared for violence. They stopped short when they saw Joseph kneeling beside Evangeline, his hands covered with her blood, his knife still visible beside the medical supplies scattered on the ground. "Get away from my daughter," Morrison shouted, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "What have you done to her?" Joseph slowly raised his hands, making no sudden movements that might provoke the armed men. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter has been bitten by a large rattlesnake. I've been treating her wounds and drawing out the venom. She needs immediate medical attention." Morrison's eyes took in the scene. His daughter's torn dress, the blood, the Cherokee doctor with a knife in his hand. The implications were immediately clear to a man whose worldview was shaped by prejudice and suspicion. "You attacked her." "Papa, no," Evangeline managed to say, though her voice was growing weaker. "The snake bit me. Dr. Running Bear saved my life," but Morrison wasn't listening to his daughter's words. He was seeing what his prejudices expected him to see. A Cherokee man, alone with his white daughter, evidence of violence, a situation that demanded immediate and decisive action according to the unwritten laws of frontier justice. "Tie him up," Morrison ordered his ranch hands. "We'll take him back to town and let the sheriff sort this out." Joseph knew better than to resist. Fighting would only confirm Morrison's suspicions and delay the medical treatment that Evangeline desperately needed. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter is still in danger from the venom. She needs continued treatment, or she could die within the hour." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "We'll get her to a real doctor," Morrison replied coldly, motioning for his men to secure Joseph's hands behind his back. "The nearest physician is 30 miles away," Joseph said urgently. "She won't survive the journey without immediate treatment. Please let me finish what I started." Evangeline tried to sit up, but the effort sent fresh waves of pain through her body. "Papa, please listen to him. He was helping me." Morrison looked at his daughter, seeing for the first time how pale she had become, how labored her breathing was growing. The rational part of his mind recognized that she was seriously ill, but accepting Joseph's help meant admitting that a Cherokee doctor possessed knowledge and skills that might be superior to white medicine. "What kind of treatment?" Morrison asked reluctantly. Joseph carefully explained the traditional Cherokee remedies that could counteract rattlesnake venom, combined with modern medical techniques for managing shock and preventing infection. His explanation was detailed and professional, demonstrating knowledge that couldn't be dismissed as primitive superstition. "And if we don't listen to you?" Morrison asked. "Then your daughter will likely die before you can reach another doctor," Joseph replied honestly. "The venom from a snake that size will overwhelm her system within 2 hours. I can help her, but only if you let me complete the treatment." Morrison stared at Joseph for a long moment, weighing his prejudices against his love for his daughter. "If you're lying to me, if you've harmed her in any way, I'll kill you myself." "I understand," Joseph replied, "but right now your daughter's life is more important than your opinion of me." For the next hour, Joseph worked to save Evangeline's life while her father and his men watched every move with suspicious eyes. He administered traditional Cherokee remedies that helped her body process the remaining venom, used modern medical techniques to stabilize her blood pressure and prevent shock, and applied healing poultices to prevent infection at the bite site. Gradually, Evangeline's breathing became easier, her color improved, and the dangerous swelling around the bite wounds began to subside. Joseph's treatment was working, but he knew the real crisis was yet to come. As word spread through Cedar Ridge about what had happened near Broken Creek, the story grew and changed with each telling. By evening, half the town believed that Joseph, Running Bear, had attacked Samuel Morrison's daughter, while the other half wasn't sure what to believe. The only thing everyone agreed on was that something needed to be done. Mayor William Brennan called an emergency town meeting to address the situation. The courthouse was packed with ranchers, shop owners and their families, all demanding answers and most expecting justice to be swift and decisive. Joseph sat in the front row, flanked by 2 deputies, while Evangeline rested at home under her father's watchful care. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Brennan began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing community crises. "We're here to discuss the incident involving Miss Evangeline Morrison and Dr. Joseph Running Bear. I've spoken with both parties, and I believe we have established the basic facts." The mayor recounted the events as he understood them: the snake bite, Joseph's medical intervention, and the complicated circumstances that had brought a Cherokee doctor into intimate contact with the daughter of Cedar Ridge's most prominent citizen. "Now," Brennan continued, "we have a problem. Dr. Running Bear undoubtedly saved Miss Morrison's life through his quick action and medical expertise. However, the nature of his treatment required intimate physical contact that has compromised Miss Morrison's reputation according to the standards of our community." A murmur ran through the crowd as people processed the implications. In 1887 frontier society, any situation that left a young woman alone with a man, especially one involving physical contact and the removal of clothing for medical treatment, created social complications that went far beyond the immediate medical emergency. Reverend Marcus Whitfield, the town's Baptist minister, stood to address the gathering. Mayor Brennan, while we're all grateful that Miss Morrison's life was saved, we cannot ignore the social implications of what has occurred. A young woman's reputation is her most precious possession, and once damaged, it cannot easily be restored. Samuel Morrison rose from his seat, his face showing the strain of wrestling with conflicting emotions. Gentlemen, I want to be clear about what happened. Dr. Running Bear saved my daughter's life. She would have died without his intervention. However, Reverend Whitfield is correct about the social complications. Joseph had remained silent throughout the discussion, understanding that his Cherokee heritage made his voice less welcome in this forum than his medical expertise had been beside Evangeline's sickbed. But now he stood, knowing that his future, and possibly his life, depended on how the town chose to resolve this crisis. Honorable citizens, Joseph began, his voice carrying the education and dignity that his medical training had given him. I understand your concerns about propriety and social standards. However, I acted as a physician treating a patient in a life-threatening emergency. My Cherokee heritage includes strong traditions about the sacred nature of healing work and the protection of those who are vulnerable. Dr. Harrison Wells, the white physician from the county seat who had arrived that afternoon, stood to support Joseph's statement. I've examined Miss Morrison and reviewed Dr. Running Bear's treatment. His medical intervention was not only appropriate, but expertly executed. She would certainly have died without immediate attention, and his combination of traditional Cherokee remedies with modern medical techniques was remarkably effective. The crowd buzzed with discussion as people tried to reconcile their prejudices with the undeniable fact that Joseph had saved a life using superior medical knowledge. But the social implications remained unchanged. It was old Martha Crow Feather, the Cherokee woman who served as midwife to both the Mexican and Cherokee families in the area, who provided the solution that no one else had considered. There is a way, she said, her voice cutting through the noise of debate. In Cherokee tradition, when a man saves a woman's life through intimate healing, when he has seen her body and touched her in ways that only a husband should, there is a ritual that can restore honor to both. The courthouse fell silent as Martha continued. The healing bond ritual creates a sacred marriage between the healer and the healed. It recognizes that their spirits have been joined through the act of life-saving, and it provides protection for both parties according to Cherokee law. Mayor Brennan looked confused. Mrs. Crow Feather, are you suggesting that Dr. Running Bear and Miss Morrison should be married? Not suggested, Martha replied firmly. Required. Cherokee law says that when a man saves a woman's life through intimate healing, they become spiritually bound. To ignore this bond brings bad medicine to the entire community. Samuel Morrison stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. My daughter is not going to be forced into marriage with a Cherokee doctor because of some primitive ritual. But Reverend Whitfield was nodding thoughtfully. Actually, Mr. Morrison, there is biblical precedent for this type of arrangement. When circumstances beyond anyone's control create intimate contact between unmarried people, marriage becomes the appropriate solution to preserve honor and provide protection. Joseph felt the room spinning around him as he realized what was being proposed. He had saved Evangeline Morrison's life, and now Cherokee tradition and white social conventions were combining to force them into marriage whether they wanted it or not. What about what Miss Morrison wants? Joseph asked quietly. Shouldn't she have a voice in determining her own future? It was a radical question for 1887, suggesting that a young woman might have the right to choose her own husband rather than accepting the arrangements made by men. But before anyone could respond, the courthouse doors opened and Evangeline Morrison herself entered, supported by her father's housekeeper, but walking under her own power. "I believe I should speak for myself," Evangeline said, her voice still weak but carrying unmistakable determination. "Dr. Running Bear saved my life when I was dying. If Cherokee tradition says we are bound together because of his healing work, and if white society says my reputation requires the protection of marriage, then perhaps both traditions are pointing toward the same solution." She looked directly at Joseph, meeting his eyes across the crowded courthouse. "Dr. Running Bear, you didn't choose to save my life in order to gain a wife. I didn't choose to be bitten by a rattlesnake in order to find a husband, but maybe choice isn't always the most important thing. Maybe sometimes honor and gratitude and the desire to do what's right can be a foundation for something good." Joseph stared at her, seeing not just the ranch owner's daughter whose life he had saved, but a young woman with the courage to stand before her entire community and accept a marriage that violated every social expectation of her upbringing. "Missy Morrison," he said carefully, "a marriage based on obligation and social necessity rather than affection and choice would be difficult for both of us. Are you certain you want to commit your life to such an arrangement?" Evangeline's answer surprised everyone in the courthouse, including herself. "Dr. Running Bear, in the past 8 hours, you've shown me more kindness, competence, and respect than I've received from any of the men my father has considered suitable husbands. If I must marry someone to satisfy society's demands, I would prefer to marry a man who values my life enough to risk his own reputation to save it." The courthouse erupted in discussion as people tried to process this unexpected turn of events. The Cherokee doctor and the ranch owner's daughter were agreeing to a forced marriage that satisfied both Cherokee tradition and white social conventions, but they were doing so with a dignity and mutual respect that transformed the arrangement from a punishment into something that looked remarkably like a choice. Mayor Brennan called for order. "If both parties are agreeable, and if this arrangement satisfies the concerns of both communities, then I suppose we should proceed with the necessary ceremonies." Martha Crowfeather stepped forward. "The healing bond ritual must be performed within 3 days of the life-saving, while the spiritual connection is still strong. It requires the presence of both Cherokee and white witnesses, and it creates obligations that last for life." Reverend Whitfield nodded. "I can perform a Christian wedding ceremony that will be legally recognized, provided both parties freely consent." Samuel Morrison looked at his daughter, seeing determination in her eyes that reminded him of her deceased mother. "Evangeline, are you absolutely certain about this decision? Once it's done, it cannot be undone." Evangeline Morrison looked around. The courthouse at the faces of her community, some supportive, some disapproving, all waiting to see whether she would have the courage to follow through on her unprecedented choice. "Papa," she said quietly, "Dr. Running Bear saved my life today. If accepting marriage with him is the price of maintaining my honor and his safety in this community, then it seems like a small price to pay for being alive to make the choice at all." 3 days later, in a ceremony that combined Cherokee tradition with Christian ritual, Evangeline Morrison became Evangeline Running Bear, the first white woman in Cedar Ridge to marry a Cherokee man, and the first marriage in the community's history to be based on a forced ritual that somehow became a willing partnership. But their wedding was only the beginning of a story that would test every assumption Cedar Ridge held about race, tradition, and the power of two people determined to build something meaningful from the most unlikely circumstances. The morning after their wedding ceremony, Evangeline Running Bear woke up in a world she had never imagined entering. Joseph's clinic occupied a modest adobe building on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, far from the grand ranch house, where she had spent her 17 years surrounded by luxury and servants. The simple room where she now found herself contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and medical books written in 3 different languages: English, Spanish, and what she assumed was Cherokee. Through the thin walls, she could hear Joseph already, moving about in the clinic's main room, speaking in rapid Spanish to what sounded like multiple patients. Evangeline had studied some Spanish with her governess, but the medical terminology and regional dialect made the conversation difficult to follow. What she could understand made her realize that her new husband's practice was far busier than she had ever imagined. Evangeline dressed carefully in one of the simple dresses that Martha Crowfeather had helped her select for her new life. The elaborate gowns and jewelry that had defined her identity as Samuel Morrison's daughter would be inappropriate for a doctor's wife who needed to assist with medical emergencies and interact with patients from every social level in the community. When TC'd, she emerged from the bedroom. Evangeline found the clinic's waiting area filled with people she had never seen before: Mexican vaqueros with work injuries, Cherokee women bringing sick children, former slaves seeking treatment for ailments that the white doctors in the region refused to address. They all looked up when she appeared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. Joseph was examining a young Mexican boy's broken arm while explaining the treatment process to the child's worried mother. His hands moved with gentle precision as he set the bone and applied a splint, his voice calm and reassuring despite the language barrier. Evangeline watched, fascinated by this side of her husband that she had only glimpsed during her own emergency. Treatment. Buenos dias, Señora Running Bear, the Mexican woman said politely when Joseph had finished with her son. Gracias por ayudar a mi hijo. Evangeline realized with embarrassment that she was being thanked for helping with the boy's treatment, though she had done nothing except observe. De nada, she replied awkwardly, then looked to Joseph for guidance about her role in this unfamiliar environment. Joseph finished cleaning his medical instruments before addressing the waiting room. I'll be with each of you shortly. Mrs. Running Bear is still learning about clinic operations, so please be patient as we adjust to our new partnership. The word partnership sent a ripple through the assembled patients. Several of the Cherokee families smiled approvingly, while some of the Mexican workers looked uncertain about having a white woman involved in their medical care. The tension in the room was palpable, reflecting the complex social dynamics that Evangeline was only beginning to understand. An elderly Cherokee man stood up and addressed Joseph in their native language, speaking for several minutes in tones that sounded both respectful and concerned. Joseph responded in Cherokee, then translated for Evangeline's benefit. Thomas Walking Bear is welcoming you to our community, but he's also expressing concerns about whether you'll be able to understand and respect Cherokee healing traditions. Many of our people have had difficult experiences with white authority, figures who dismissed our cultural practices as primitive superstition. Evangeline felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She was not just Joseph's wife, but a representative of the white community whose acceptance could determine whether Cherokee patients felt comfortable seeking medical care. Her response would set the tone for relationships that could affect dozens of families. Please tell Mr. Walking Bear that I have much to learn about Cherokee traditions, Evangeline said carefully. I hope he and others will be patient with my ignorance and help me understand how to be useful rather than intrusive in the healing work. Joseph translated her words, and Thomas Walking Bear nodded approvingly before responding in Cherokee again. This time Joseph smiled as he translated. He says you show wisdom by acknowledging what you don't know. He's offering to teach you about medicinal plants if you're willing to learn. The offer represented an extraordinary gesture of acceptance from a community that had every reason to distrust white authority. Evangeline felt both honored and overwhelmed by the responsibility it implied. "I would be very grateful for his and teaching," she replied. As the morning progressed, Evangeline observed Joseph's interactions with his diverse patient population. With the Mexican families, he spoke fluent Spanish and demonstrated familiarity with their cultural concerns about medical treatment. With the Cherokee patients, he seamlessly integrated traditional healing practices with modern medical techniques. With the few white patients who sought his care, usually for emergencies that couldn't wait for the trip to the county seat, he maintained professional distance while providing excellent medical service. Each interaction required Joseph to navigate complex cultural expectations while maintaining his medical standards. Evangeline began to understand that her husband's position in the community was far more complicated than she had realized. He was simultaneously an outsider to white society and a bridge between different communities that rarely interacted with each other. The afternoon brought Evangeline's first real test as a doctor's wife. A Mexican vaquero arrived at the clinic, supporting a fellow worker who had been gored by a bull. The injured man was bleeding heavily from wounds in his leg and abdomen, and his condition was clearly serious enough to require immediate surgery. Joseph quickly assessed the injuries while instructing Evangeline to prepare surgical instruments and assist with patient positioning. "Can you handle the sight of blood and surgery?" he asked quietly. "If not, please step outside. There's no shame in acknowledging your limitations." Evangeline thought about the comfortable life she had left behind, where her most challenging responsibility had been organizing church socials and managing household servants. The wounded vaquero was bleeding onto the examination table, his life depending on Joseph's surgical skill and whatever assistance she could provide. "Tell me what you need me to do," she replied firmly. What followed was Evangeline's introduction to the reality of frontier medicine. Joseph worked with focused intensity to repair internal damage and control bleeding, while Evangeline held instruments, managed bandages, and helped keep the patient stable during the lengthy operation. The work was physically demanding and emotionally draining, but she found herself rising to meet challenges she had never imagined facing. As Joseph stitched the final wounds, he glanced at Evangeline with newfound respect. "You have steady hands and a strong stomach. Those are valuable qualities in medical work." The compliment meant more to Evangeline than any praise she had received for her previous accomplishments in music, French, or needlework. She was contributing to work that actually mattered, helping save a man's life rather than merely entertaining other privileged women at social gatherings. But their successful surgery also attracted unwanted attention from Cedar Ridge's white establishment. Dr. Harrison Wells, the physician from the county seat, arrived at the clinic that evening with Mayor Brennan and 2 other town officials. Their purpose became clear immediately. "Dr. Running Bear," Wells began with barely concealed hostility, "I've received reports that you're performing major surgery without proper authorization. As the senior physician in this district, I have concerns about medical procedures being conducted outside established oversight." Joseph's expression remained neutral, but Evangeline could see tension building in his posture. "Dr. Wells, the patient was dying from internal bleeding. Emergency surgery was necessary to save his life, and transportation to your facility would have killed him. Nevertheless," Wells continued, "surgical procedures should be performed by properly credentialed physicians in appropriate facilities. Your clinic lacks the equipment and sterile conditions necessary for safe surgery." Mayor Brennan stepped forward with what appeared to be the real purpose of their visit. "Dr. Running Bear, there have also been concerns expressed about Mrs. Running Bear's involvement in medical procedures. Some community members feel it's inappropriate for a young woman, particularly one from a prominent family, to be exposed to the kind of intimate medical situations that occur in your practice. Evangeline felt anger rising as she realized the visit was as much about controlling her behavior as questioning Joseph's medical practices. "Mayor Brennan, I'm assisting my husband with medical emergencies that save people's lives. I fail to see how that could be considered inappropriate." "Mrs. Running Bear," Dr. Wells said condescendingly, "medical work requires extensive training and education that young women simply don't possess. Your assistance, while well-intentioned, could actually endanger patients who need professional care." Joseph had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke with quiet authority. "Gentlemen, my wife has demonstrated excellent aptitude for medical assistance. Her help today contributed to a successful surgery that saved a man's life. I'll continue to train her in proper medical procedures, and she'll continue to assist with patient care as needed." The confrontation revealed the deeper tensions surrounding their forced marriage. Evangeline's participation in Joseph's medical work challenged not just racial boundaries, but gender expectations about women's proper roles. Her willingness to work alongside a Cherokee doctor threatened multiple social hierarchies simultaneously. Dr. Wells's final warning was delivered with unmistakable menace. "Dr. Running Bear, I'll be monitoring your medical practices closely. Any deviation from proper protocols will be reported to the Territorial Medical Board. And Mrs. Running Bear, I hope you'll consider whether your current activities are appropriate for a woman of your background and social position." After the officials left, Evangeline and Joseph sat in the clinic's kitchen, both understanding that their marriage had created complications that extended far beyond their personal relationship. They were challenging social boundaries that powerful people had strong interests in maintaining. "Joseph," Evangeline said quietly, "are they threatening your medical license because of our marriage?" Joseph considered his answer carefully. "Partly because of our marriage, partly because I'm Cherokee, partly because my success challenges their assumptions about who should have authority in medical matters. Dr. Wells has been trying to limit my practice for years, and my involvement makes it worse." Joseph looked at her directly, his dark eyes serious but not unkind. "Your involvement challenges their assumptions about women's capabilities and proper social roles. That makes some people very uncomfortable." Evangeline thought about the life she had left behind. Comfortable, predictable, socially approved, and ultimately meaningless. Then she thought about the afternoon surgery, the grateful look in the vaquero's eyes, the sense of purpose she had felt while helping save a man's life. "Joseph, I need to ask you something important. Are you training me to assist with medical work because you need help, or because you think it will help me adjust to being married to you?" Joseph smiled for the first time since the official's visit. "Both, honestly. I do need competent assistance, especially with surgical procedures, but I also think you have the intelligence and temperament to become genuinely skilled at medical work if that's what you want." "What I want," Evangeline said slowly, "is to be useful. I've spent 17 years learning skills that accomplished nothing except making me suitable for marriage to wealthy men. I'd like to learn skills that actually help people." Joseph nodded approvingly. "Then we'll start your real medical education tomorrow. But I should warn you, if you become genuinely competent at medical work, it will create even more problems with people like Dr. Wells and Mayor Brennan." Evangeline's response surprised them both. "Good. Maybe it's time this community had more problems with people who want to limit what others can accomplish." Over the following weeks, Evangeline threw herself into learning medical skills with the same determination she had once applied to mastering French and piano. Joseph proved to be an excellent teacher, combining traditional Cherokee knowledge with modern medical techniques to create a comprehensive education that no formal medical school would have provided. She learned to identify and prepare medicinal plants that grew wild on the Texas prairie. She practiced surgical techniques on animal carcasses until her suturing was precise and efficient. She studied anatomy from Joseph's medical texts and learned to recognize symptoms of diseases that were common in frontier communities. Most importantly, she learned to communicate with patients from different cultural backgrounds, developing basic Spanish and picking up enough Cherokee to show respect for traditional healing practices. Her willingness to learn from patients as well as teach them earned gradual acceptance from communities that had initially viewed her with suspicion. But Evangeline's rapid progress in medical skills created new tensions within Cedar Ridge's white establishment. When she successfully delivered a baby whose birth had been complicated by breech presentation, working alongside Joseph to save both mother and child, word spread quickly through the community. Sarah Hendricks, wife of the town's banker and unofficial leader of Cedar Ridge's social elite, paid a visit to the clinic with several other prominent women. Their purpose was clearly to pressure Evangeline back into more conventional behavior. "Evangeline, dear," Sarah began with false sweetness, "we're all concerned about you. This medical work you've been doing seems so inappropriate for a young woman of your background." "Mrs. Hendricks," Evangeline replied politely, "I've been helping save people's lives. I'm not sure why that would be considered inappropriate." "Well, dear, there are certain things that proper ladies simply don't do. Working with intimate medical conditions, associating with people of questionable social standing, involving yourself in men's professional activities, these things reflect poorly on your family's reputation." Evangeline felt the familiar anger that had been building over weeks of similar conversations. "Mrs. Hendricks, last week I helped deliver a healthy baby whose mother would have died without immediate medical intervention. If you consider that inappropriate, then perhaps we have different ideas about what makes a proper lady." The social pressure intensified when Evangeline's father arrived at the clinic the following day, clearly uncomfortable with the reports he had been receiving about his daughter's activities. "Evangeline," Samuel Morrison said without preamble, "people are talking about your involvement in medical work. They're saying you're forgetting your proper place in society." Evangeline looked at her father, seeing the man who had once protected and provided for her, but also recognizing the limitations of his worldview. "Papa, what is my proper place? Sitting in a parlor arranging flowers while people die from treatable medical conditions. Your proper place is as the wife of a respectable man, maintaining a household and raising children in accordance with Christian values and social standards." "I am the wife of a respectable man," Evangeline replied firmly. "Joseph is a skilled physician who serves this community with dedication and competence, and I'm learning to assist him in work that serves God by healing the sick and helping those who need medical care." Samuel Morrison struggled with the contradiction between his love for his daughter and his discomfort with her unconventional choices. "Evangeline, this marriage was forced on you by circumstances beyond your control. You don't have to compound the difficulty by involving yourself in activities that further distance you from respectable society." Evangeline's response revealed how much she had changed in just a few weeks of marriage to Joseph Running Bear. "Papa, this marriage may have been forced by circumstances, but my decision to make it meaningful is entirely my choice. I'm learning skills that matter, helping people who need help, and building something worthwhile with a man who respects my intelligence and capabilities." She paused, then continued with quiet determination. "If respectable society can't accept that, then perhaps the problem isn't with my choices, but with society's definition of respectability." The confrontation with her father marked a turning point in Evangeline's transformation from sheltered ranch owner's daughter to competent medical practitioner. She had chosen to embrace her new life rather than merely endure it, and that choice was creating ripple effects throughout the entire community. Meanwhile, Joseph was dealing with his own challenges as word spread about his wife's medical capabilities. Other Cherokee healers expressed concern about sharing traditional knowledge with a white woman, while white physicians questioned his judgment in training someone they considered fundamentally unsuited for medical work. The evening after Samuel Morrison's visit, Joseph and Evangeline sat on their small porch, watching the sun set over the Texas prairie while discussing the mounting pressure they were facing from both communities. "Are you regretting your decision to train me in medical work?" Evangeline asked quietly. Joseph considered the question seriously. "I'm concerned about the difficulties it's creating for both of us. But I'm not regretting it. You have genuine talent for healing work, and you're already making a difference in patients' lives, even if it costs you your medical practice." Joseph's answer revealed the depth of his commitment to their partnership. "Evangeline, I've spent 8 years practicing medicine alone, dealing with prejudice and isolation, while trying to serve people who need healing. Working with you has shown me what real partnership feels like. If I lose my practice because I refuse to limit your involvement, then I'll find another way to continue healing work." Evangeline felt her heart respond to Joseph's words in ways she hadn't expected when she agreed to their forced marriage. She was falling in love with her husband, not because of romantic passion, but because of shared purpose and mutual respect that was creating something stronger than conventional attraction. "Joseph," she said carefully, "when we agreed to this marriage, I expected it to be a matter of honor and social necessity. I didn't expect to find a true partner." Joseph took her hand, their fingers intertwining as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Neither did I. But maybe the best partnerships are the ones that grow from working together towards something meaningful, rather than the ones based only on emotional attraction." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. A Mexican vaquero rode up to the clinic, calling out urgently in Spanish that someone had been seriously injured at the Rodriguez ranch. Joseph and Evangeline quickly gathered their medical supplies and prepared to ride out for their first emergency call as a true medical team. As they rode through the darkness toward the emergency, Evangeline realized that her forced marriage had become something she had never imagined possible, a genuine partnership with a man who valued her contributions and supported her growth into capabilities she had never known she possessed. But their growing success as a medical team was about to face its greatest test, as forces within Cedar Ridge prepared to challenge not just their marriage, but their right to practice medicine together at all. The emergency call that interrupted Joseph and Evangeline's evening conversation led them into the darkest chapter of their partnership yet. The Rodriguez Ranch lay 15 miles southeast of Cedar Ridge, in territory that was technically part of their medical coverage area, but practically beyond the reach of law enforcement or social oversight. As they rode through the moonless night, following the desperate vaquero who had summoned them, neither Joseph nor Evangeline could have anticipated that they were riding toward a confrontation that would test not just their medical skills, but their courage, their marriage, and their very survival. The Rodriguez family had been sharecroppers on land owned by cattle baron Marcus Whitmore, elder brother of the town's mayor, and a man whose wealth and influence extended far beyond Cedar Ridge. Whitmore had a reputation for treating his Mexican workers harshly, paying minimal wages while demanding maximum labor. But the Rodriguez family had endured because they had nowhere else to go and no other means of supporting their 5 children. When Joseph and Evangeline arrived at the small adobe farmhouse, they found a scene that immediately set off alarm bells in both their minds. Maria Rodriguez lay unconscious on a rough wooden table, her face severely bruised and her left arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Her husband Carlos stood nearby, his own face showing signs of recent violence, while their children huddled in the corner with the terrified expression of those who had witnessed something terrible. ¿Qué pasó aquí? Joseph asked Carlos in Spanish, but the man's eyes darted nervously toward the shadows beyond the lamplight, and his response was barely audible. Los hombres de Whitmore, Carlos whispered. Dijeron que no podíamos pagar. La renta, cuando María protestó, ellos... His voice broke, unable to continue describing what Whitmore's men had done to his wife. Joseph's face hardened as he began examining Maria's injuries. The pattern of bruises and broken bones told a story that no medical textbook had prepared him for. Systematic violence designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Maria had been beaten unconscious while defending her family's right to remain on land they had worked for 3 years. Evangeline knelt beside the injured woman, her medical training automatically taking over despite the horror of the situation. Joseph, she has a severe concussion, possible internal bleeding, and the arm is definitely broken. But look at these other injuries. She lowered her voice so the children couldn't hear. This wasn't just a beating. This was torture. As they worked to stabilize Maria's condition, Carlos explained what had led to the attack. Marcus Whitmore had recently decided to consolidate his land holdings, evicting sharecropper families to make room for expanded cattle operations. When the Rodriguez family had protested that they had worked the land faithfully and deserved notice before eviction, Whitmore had sent his foreman, Jake Morrison, Samuel Morrison's younger brother, along with 2 hired guns to deliver a more emphatic message. The beating had been methodical and deliberate, designed to ensure that word would spread among other Mexican families about the consequences of challenging Whitmore's decisions. Maria had been targeted specifically because she had spoken most forcefully about their rights, and the violence against her was intended to break the spirit of resistance in the entire sharecropper community. Carlos, Joseph said quietly, while preparing morphine to manage Maria's pain, we need to get her to the clinic where I can properly treat these injuries. But first, I need to ask you something important. Are you planning to report this attack to the sheriff? Carlos laughed bitterly. Sheriff Reynolds works for the same people who pay Jake Morrison. He would arrest me for disturbing the peace before he would investigate an attack on my family. Joseph and Evangeline exchanged glances, both understanding the impossible situation they were facing. Maria Rodriguez needed immediate medical care that could only be provided at their clinic, but moving her would mean involving themselves in a conflict between Marcus Whitmore and the Mexican workers he was determined to remove from his land. We're taking her to our clinic, Evangeline said firmly, before Joseph could voice his concerns. Whatever the political complications, she needs medical care, and we're not going to let her suffer because we're afraid of Marcus Whitmore. Joseph felt a surge of pride in his wife's courage, even as he worried about the consequences of their decision. Carlos, gather your family and come with us. It won't be safe for you to stay here after Whitmore's men learn that Maria survived their attack. The journey back to Cedar Ridge took 4 hours, with Maria Rodriguez unconscious in the back of their medical wagon while her family rode alongside. Joseph and Evangeline worked continuously to keep her stable, monitoring her breathing and pulse while adjusting treatment as her condition fluctuated. As dawn broke over the Texas prairie, they reached the clinic to find an unwelcome reception. Committee waiting for them. Marcus Whitmore sat on his horse in front of their building, flanked by his foreman Jake Morrison and 2 men whose gun belts and cold expressions marked them as hired killers. Sheriff Reynolds stood nearby, his badge glinting in the early morning sunlight, but his allegiance clearly aligned with the cattle baron rather than law enforcement. "Dr. Running Bear," Whitmore called out as their wagon approached. "I understand. You've been trespassing on my property and interfering with my business operations. Joseph brought the wagon to a stop, his mind racing through options that all seemed to lead toward violence. "Mr. Whitmore, I was summoned to provide medical care to an injured woman. That's my professional obligation, regardless of property, lines, or business disputes." Whitmore's smile was cold and calculating. "The woman in your wagon was injured while resisting lawful eviction from my property. She and her family are trespassers who refused to leave when ordered. Any injuries they sustained were the result of their own criminal behavior." Evangeline climbed down from the wagon, her medical bag in hand and her expression showing none of the fear that was churning in her stomach. "Mr. Whitmore, Maria Rodriguez has been systematically beaten and tortured. Those are not injuries that result from resisting eviction. They're the result of deliberate violence." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Mrs. Running Bear, you should be careful about making accusations you can't prove, especially against respectable businessmen." "The evidence is on Maria's body," Evangeline replied steadily. "Any competent physician can distinguish between injuries from a fall or struggle and injuries from deliberate beating." Sheriff Reynolds finally spoke, though his words revealed whose interests he served. "Dr. Running Bear, I'm going to have to ask you to turn the Rodriguez family over to my custody. They're wanted for questioning in connection with theft and property destruction on Mr. Whitmore's ranch." Joseph understood immediately that they were facing a coordinated effort to silence the Rodriguez family permanently. Once in Sheriff Reynolds' custody, they would likely disappear entirely, eliminating any witnesses to Whitmore's campaign of violence against Mexican workers. "Sheriff," Joseph said carefully, "Maria Rodriguez is critically injured and needs immediate medical treatment. I cannot release her into custody until her condition is stabilized." "Doctor," Whitmore interrupted, his tone carrying unmistakable menace, "you seem to be forgetting your place in this community. You exist here by sufferance, providing medical services to people that respectable physicians won't treat. But that sufferance can be withdrawn if you involve yourself in matters that don't concern you." The threat was explicit and deadly serious. Whitmore was reminding Joseph that his position in Cedar Ridge depended on the tolerance of powerful white men, and that tolerance could be revoked if he interfered with their business interests. Evangeline stepped closer to her husband, presenting a united front despite the dangerous odds they faced. "Mr. Whitmore, Dr. Running Bear's medical practice serves the entire community, including people who work on your ranch. His reputation for competent care benefits everyone in this region." "His reputation," Jake Morrison said with obvious hostility, "has been damaged by his association with certain disruptive influences. Some people think he's been getting ideas above his station since marrying into respectable white society." The insult was directed at Evangeline, but it also revealed the deeper resentment that some members of Cedar Ridge's white establishment felt about Joseph's marriage to Samuel Morrison's daughter. They saw it as a Cherokee man gaining inappropriate social elevation through connection to a prominent white family. Joseph felt anger rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Gentlemen, we can discuss community relations after I've provided necessary medical care to a critically injured patient. Right now, Maria Rodriguez needs immediate treatment." "Right now," Sheriff Reynolds said, moving his hand toward his weapon. "The Rodriguez family needs to come with me for questioning about criminal activity on Mr. Whitmore's property." The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Joseph and Evangeline faced a choice between abandoning their patient to almost certain death or resisting law enforcement and powerful business interests that could destroy their lives and medical practice. It was at this crucial moment that an unexpected ally arrived to shift the balance of power. Dr. Harrison Wells rode up to the clinic, accompanied by two men whose clothing and equipment marked them as federal marshals. Wells dismounted and addressed the assembled group with professional authority. "Gentlemen, I received word that there was a medical emergency requiring consultation. Dr. Running Bear, what is the patient's condition? Joseph quickly summarized Maria Rodriguez's injuries, while Wells conducted his own examination. The federal marshals observed the confrontation between local law enforcement and the medical practitioners, their presence introducing complications that Whitmore clearly hadn't anticipated. Dr. Running Bear, Wells announced after his examination. This patient shows clear evidence of systematic assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. These injuries are consistent with torture rather than resistance to lawful authority. Sheriff Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Wells, the Rodriguez family is wanted for questioning in connection with criminal activity. Their injuries may have been sustained during the commission of those crimes. One of the federal marshals stepped forward, introducing himself as Marshal Thomas Crawford. Sheriff, we're investigating reports of organized violence against Mexican workers in this region, cases involving systematic assault on families who are legally resident in the United States fall under federal jurisdiction. Whitmore's expression darkened as he realized that federal involvement could expose his entire operation of intimidating Mexican workers through violence. Marshal Crawford, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the situation here. No misunderstanding, Mr. Whitmore, Crawford replied. We've been investigating reports of coordinated violence against Mexican families throughout this region. The Rodriguez family's injuries provide evidence that supports those reports. Jake Morrison made the mistake of trying to intimidate federal officers the same way he intimidated local residents. Marshal, you're interfering with local law enforcement and legitimate business operations. Mr. Whitmore has every right to remove trespassers from his property. Mr. Morrison, Crawford said coldly, threatening federal officers in the performance of their duties is a federal crime. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. The arrival of federal law enforcement transformed the confrontation completely. Whitmore and his men found themselves facing potential federal prosecution rather than easily intimidated local medical practitioners. Sheriff Reynolds realized that his cooperation with Whitmore's violence could result in his own arrest for obstruction of justice. Dr. Wells continued his examination of Maria Rodriguez, documenting her injuries with the thoroughness of someone who understood their legal significance. Dr. Running Bear, your initial treatment was excellent, but this patient needs immediate surgery to address internal bleeding. Do you have surgical facilities adequate for the procedure? Joseph nodded. Toward the clinics. We have a fully equipped surgical suite. Mrs. Running Bear assists with surgical procedures. She's become quite skilled over the past few weeks. Wells looked surprised at the mention of Evangeline's medical involvement, but Marshal Crawford was more interested in the patient's testimony. Will the patient be able to provide a statement about the attack once she's recovered? If the surgery is successful and she recovers consciousness, yes, Joseph replied, but right now her survival depends on immediate medical intervention. Whitmore made one final attempt to control the situation. Marshal Crawford, surely you understand that business disputes between property owners and workers sometimes involve regrettable incidents. But federal intervention in local affairs sets a dangerous precedent. Crawford's response ended Whitmore's hopes of avoiding federal scrutiny. Mr. Whitmore, systematic violence against Mexican workers isn't a local business dispute. It's a federal crime. You and your associates will remain available for questioning while we investigate this matter thoroughly. As the federal marshals escorted Whitmore, Morrison, and Sheriff Reynolds away from the clinic, Joseph and Evangeline finally turned their attention to the medical emergency that had started the entire confrontation. With Dr. Wells assisting, they began the delicate surgery necessary to save Maria Rodriguez's life. The operation took 4 hours, during which Joseph's surgical skills and Evangeline's assistance proved crucial in repairing internal damage and stabilizing their patient. Dr. Wells observed their teamwork with growing respect, recognizing that their partnership produced medical results that neither could have achieved alone. "Dr. Running Bear," Wells said as they completed the surgery, "your surgical technique is exceptional, and Mrs. Running Bear's assistance is remarkably skilled. How long have you been training her in medical procedures?" "About 6 weeks," Joseph replied, cleaning surgical instruments while Evangeline monitored Maria's recovery from anesthesia. Wells looked amazed. 6 weeks? She's developed skills that most medical students take months to acquire. Have you considered formal medical education for her? Evangeline looked up from her patient monitoring. "Dr. Wells, are you suggesting that women can receive formal medical training? There are medical schools in the East that accept qualified women students," Wells replied. "The Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, for instance. Your demonstrated aptitude and practical experience would certainly qualify you for admission." The suggestion opened possibilities that Evangeline had never imagined. Formal medical education would provide knowledge and credentials that could transform her from a doctor's assistant into a physician in her own right. But it would also mean leaving Joseph and their developing practice for years of study in distant institutions. Joseph sensed his wife's internal conflict. "Evangeline, if you want to pursue formal medical education, I'll support that decision completely. Your potential as a physician is too valuable to waste. But what about our practice here? What about the patients who depend on our partnership?" Joseph's answer revealed how much their forced marriage had evolved into genuine partnership. "Our practice will be here when you return, and it will be stronger because you'll bring formal medical credentials to complement practical experience. The community needs physicians who understand both modern medical science and local cultural traditions." Maria Rodriguez stirred on the examination table, regaining consciousness as the anesthesia wore off. Her first words, spoken in weak Spanish, were questions about her children's safety. When Carlos assured her that the family was safe and that the federal marshals were investigating the attack, she began to weep with relief. "Gracias, Doctora," she whispered, looking at both Joseph and Evangeline. "You saved my life and my family." The title Doctora, applied to Evangeline, carried recognition that went beyond gratitude. In Maria's eyes, Evangeline had earned the right to be called a doctor through her medical skill and courage in facing down powerful enemies to provide care. Dr. Wells witnessed this exchange and made a decision that would change multiple lives. "Mrs. Running Bear, I'm writing letters of recommendation to 3 medical colleges that accept women students. Your demonstrated competence and courage in providing medical care under dangerous conditions make you an ideal candidate for formal medical education." Marshal Crawford returned to the clinic that evening with news that transformed the political landscape of the entire region. "Dr. Running Bear, Mrs. Running Bear, your treatment of the Rodriguez family has provided crucial evidence in our investigation. Mr. Whitmore and his associates are facing federal charges for organized violence against Mexican workers." The marshal's next words revealed how completely the power structure had shifted. Furthermore, the territorial government is establishing a new medical district with Dr. Running Bear as senior physician and Mrs. Running Bear as associate physician, pending completion of her formal medical education. Joseph and Evangeline looked at each other, realizing that their forced marriage had evolved into something neither had imagined possible. A true partnership that was transforming not just their own lives, but the entire community's approach to medical care and social justice. But their greatest challenges still lay ahead, as enemies defeated in open confrontation prepared to strike back through more subtle and dangerous means. The federal investigation of Marcus Whitmore's violence against Mexican workers had created a deceptive calm in Cedar Ridge. But beneath the surface, powerful forces were mobilizing to strike back at Joseph and Evangeline Running Bear in ways that couldn't be traced to official sources. While the territorial government's recognition of their medical partnership had provided legal protection, it had also made them targets for enemies who preferred to operate in shadows rather than face federal scrutiny. 3 months after Maria Rodriguez's rescue, autumn was settling over the Texas prairie when the first signs of organized retaliation began to appear. It started with small incidents that could be dismissed as coincidence. Medical supplies mysteriously spoiled or contaminated, patients arriving at the clinic only to find false notices claiming the doctors were unavailable, and whispered rumors spreading through the white community that Joseph's Cherokee healing practices involved dangerous superstitions that threatened Christian souls. Evangeline was preparing for her departure to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania when she began noticing patterns in these seemingly random problems. Her analytical mind, sharpened by months of medical training, recognized that the incidents were too well coordinated to be accidental. Someone was conducting a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine their medical practice while avoiding direct confrontation that might attract federal attention. The revelation came through an unexpected source. Emma Hartwell, the 15-year-old daughter of Cedar Ridge's blacksmith, arrived at the clinic one evening in obvious distress, claiming she needed medical attention for a twisted ankle. But once inside, her real purpose became clear. "Mrs. Running Bear," Emma whispered urgently, "I need to tell you something important, but you can't let anyone know it came from me. There are men meeting secretly in my father's workshop after dark, planning ways to force you and Dr. Running Bear to leave." Cedar Ridge. Evangeline felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of plans, Emma?" The girl looked terrified, but determined to warn them. "They're talking about making your medical practice impossible to continue. They want to ruin your reputation so that patients stop coming, and they're planning to pressure the territorial government to revoke your medical authority." "Who's involved in these meetings?" Emma's answer confirmed Evangeline's worst fears. "Jake Morrison is leading them, even though he's supposed to be in federal custody. Dr. Wells from the county seat is involved, and so are several ranchers whose names I don't know. They're calling themselves the Citizens Committee for Public Safety." The name was typical of vigilante organizations that operated throughout the frontier, claiming to protect community welfare while actually serving the interests of powerful men who felt threatened by social change. Joseph and Evangeline's successful medical partnership challenged too many established hierarchies, racial, gender, and class, to be tolerated by those who benefited from traditional power structures. "Emma," Evangeline said carefully, "this is very dangerous information. Are you certain about what you heard?" The girl nodded emphatically. "Mrs. Running Bear, my older brother Pedro works for Dr. Running Bear, and he says you two are the only doctors who treat Mexican families with respect. These men want to stop that because they think Mexican workers are getting too many ideas about their rights." Evangeline realized that the Citizens Committee's opposition went beyond personal animosity toward her marriage to Joseph. Their medical practice had become a symbol of social change that threatened the economic system of cheap Mexican labor that enriched men like Marcus Whitmore. "Emma, what specific plans did you hear them discussing?" The girl's answer revealed the sophistication of their enemy's strategy. They're going to spread stories that Dr. Running Bear uses Cherokee witchcraft instead of real medicine, and that you're not a proper doctor because women can't understand medical science. They want to convince people that coming to your clinic is dangerous for their souls and their bodies. It was a clever approach that exploited both racial prejudice and religious fears while avoiding direct violence that might attract federal intervention. By attacking their medical reputation rather than their persons, the Citizens Committee could destroy their practice while maintaining plausible deniability about their motives. Joseph arrived at the clinic as Emma was leaving, and Evangeline quickly shared the warning they had received. His expression grew increasingly grim as he understood the implications of organized opposition that operated outside legal channels. "This explains the recent problems we've been experiencing," Joseph said thoughtfully. "Contaminated medical supplies, patients who don't show up for scheduled appointments, rumors about Cherokee healing practices being dangerous. It's all part of a coordinated campaign." "Can we prove their involvement?" Evangeline asked. Joseph shook his head. "Not without putting Emma and her family at risk. And even if we could prove it, what could we do? The Citizens Committee isn't breaking any laws by spreading rumors and discouraging patients from seeking our medical care." They spent the evening discussing options that all seemed inadequate. Appealing to federal authorities required evidence of actual crimes, not just rumors and economic pressure. Moving their practice to another location would mean abandoning patients who depended on their care. Fighting back through legal channels would be expensive and time-consuming, with uncertain results. It was Evangeline who proposed the most daring response to their enemy's campaign. "Joseph, what if we turn their strategy against them? Instead of defending against false accusations about Cherokee healing practices, what if we openly demonstrate the effectiveness of combining traditional Cherokee medicine with modern medical science?" Joseph looked intrigued, but concerned. "That would be risky. If Cherokee healing methods fail in a public demonstration, it would confirm everything our enemies are saying about primitive superstition. But if they succeed," Evangeline continued, "it would prove that Cherokee traditional knowledge has genuine medical value, and that our combined approach produces better results than either system alone." The opportunity for such a demonstration came sooner than expected. A typhoid outbreak struck the Mexican worker community in late October, overwhelming the limited medical resources available in the region. Dr. Wells from the county seat refused to treat Mexican patients, claiming his practice was too busy with white patients to spare time for charity cases. Joseph and Evangeline found themselves facing a medical crisis that could affect dozens of families, with treatment methods that were proving inadequate against the virulent strain of typhoid that was spreading through the overcrowded worker camps. Traditional medical approaches were failing, and patients were dying despite their best efforts. It was old Martha Crow Feather who suggested the solution that would test everything they had built together. In Cherokee tradition, typhoid sickness responds to specific plant medicines that work with the body's own healing power. But the treatment requires ceremonial preparation that honors the spirits of the healing plants. Joseph understood immediately what Martha was proposing. "You want to conduct traditional Cherokee healing ceremonies as part of medical treatment for typhoid patients, combined with your modern medicines," Martha clarified. "Cherokee plant knowledge and ceremony, plus white medicine techniques, plus the woman doctor's healing touch. All three together make stronger medicine than anyone alone." Evangeline felt excitement rising as she grasped the implications. "We could document the results carefully, showing how traditional Cherokee remedies enhance the effectiveness of modern medical treatment. If it works, we'll have proof that combining cultural traditions produces superior medical outcomes." Wells looked uncomfortable as he delivered his final piece of news. "There might be, but it would require testimony from patients whose lives were saved by your treatment methods. And I have to warn you, the Citizens Committee has been intimidating potential witnesses, making it clear that supporting your medical practice could result in economic retaliation and social ostracism." The systematic intimidation campaign revealed how thoroughly their enemies had planned their assault. By silencing patients who might testify about successful treatment, The Citizens Committee was ensuring that the medical board would hear only negative evidence about Cherokee healing practices and women's medical capabilities. Evangeline felt despair settling over her as she realized how completely they had been outmaneuvered. Their medical success meant nothing if patients were too frightened to testify about it. Their innovative treatment methods would be condemned as dangerous experimentation if no witnesses were willing to speak in their defense. It was at this moment of crisis that an unexpected alliance emerged to challenge the Citizens Committee's campaign of intimidation. Maria Rodriguez, whose life had been saved during the confrontation with Marcus Whitmore, arrived at the clinic, accompanied by a delegation of Mexican families who had received treatment from Joseph and Evangeline. Doctora, Maria said, with quiet determination, "We heard about the lies being told about your medicine. We come to say that we will speak the truth, no matter what threats they make." Carlos Rodriguez stepped forward to support his wife's declaration. "Dr. Running Bear, Mrs. Running Bear, you saved my family when powerful men tried to destroy us. Now we help save your family when the same men try to destroy you." The delegation included 12 families whose lives had been directly impacted by Joseph and Evangeline's medical care, children whose fevers had been broken by Cherokee plant medicines, workers whose injuries had been healed by innovative surgical techniques, mothers whose difficult births had been managed through the combined skills of both doctors. "We know they threatened to fire us from jobs, to evict us from homes, to make trouble for our families," Maria continued. "But living with fear is not living at all. You taught us that when you stood up to Marcus Whitmore's men. Now we stand up for what is right." Dr. Wells watched this demonstration of courage with obvious emotion. "Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Running Bear, I need you to understand what you're risking. The Citizens Committee has significant economic power in this region. Supporting Dr. and Mrs. Running Bear could result in serious consequences for your families." An elderly Mexican woman named Rosa Delgado answered for the entire group. "Dr. Wells, my grandson was dying from the sickness that kills children's lungs. Your white medicine could not help him. Cherokee plant medicine saved his life. How can we be silent about miracle of healing because bad men make threats?" Her words crystallized the moral dimension of the conflict that transcended medical and political considerations. The Citizens Committee was asking people to deny the evidence of their own experience, to condemn medical practices that had saved their lives and their children's lives, in order to preserve social hierarchies that benefited only a privileged few. Joseph felt something shifting inside him as he watched the Mexican families risk everything to defend medical practices that combined his Cherokee heritage with modern medical science. These patients understood what the white establishment refused to acknowledge, that effective healing required respect for all knowledge traditions regardless of their cultural origins. "Rosa Maria, all of you," Joseph said with deep emotion. "Your courage honors the healing traditions of my Cherokee ancestors and the medical partnership that Evangeline and I have built together. If you're willing to testify about your treatment experiences, we'll fight this challenge with everything we have." Evangeline felt tears forming as she realized that their forced marriage had created something far more important than either of them had imagined. Their medical partnership had become a symbol of hope for people who had been excluded from quality healthcare because of their race, gender, or economic status. But their growing support from the Mexican community also intensified the opposition they faced from the white establishment. Jake Morrison and the Citizens Committee escalated their campaign of intimidation, making it clear that economic retaliation would be swift and severe for anyone who supported the Cherokee doctor and his inappropriate wife. The crisis reached its breaking point when Pedro Santana, a young Mexican man who worked as Joseph's assistant and translator, was brutally beaten while walking home from the clinic. The attack was clearly designed to send a message about the consequences of supporting the Running Bear medical practice, but it also provided evidence of criminal activity that couldn't be dismissed as legitimate political opposition. Marshal Thomas Crawford returned to Cedar Ridge to investigate the assault on Pedro, and his findings revealed the extent of the Citizens Committee's campaign of intimidation. Multiple Mexican families had been threatened with job loss and eviction if they testified in support of Joseph and Evangeline's medical practices. Several witnesses to successful Cherokee healing treatments had been warned that supporting primitive superstition could result in violence against their families. Dr. Running Bear, Mrs. Running Bear, Crawford announced after completing his investigation, the Citizens Committee's actions constitute criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice and deprive citizens of their civil rights. Jake Morrison and several other committee members are under federal arrest. The federal intervention provided legal protection for witnesses who wanted to testify about their medical experiences, but it also escalated the conflict to a level that threatened to tear Cedar Ridge apart completely. The white establishment saw federal protection of Mexican witnesses as government interference in local affairs, while the Mexican community viewed it as long overdue justice for systematic oppression. Evangeline realized that their medical practice had become the focal point for a broader struggle over social change that would determine the future character of frontier communities throughout the territory. The question was no longer whether Cherokee healing practices were medically effective, but whether diverse communities could coexist with mutual respect for each other's contributions. The Territorial Medical Board hearing was scheduled for December 15th, just 2 weeks before Evangeline's planned departure for medical school. The hearing would determine not only their right to practice medicine, but the precedent for whether innovative medical approaches that crossed cultural boundaries would be permitted in the territories. As they prepared for the hearing that would decide their future, Joseph and Evangeline spent long evenings reviewing patient records, organizing testimony from Mexican families who had benefited from their treatment, and working with Dr. Wells to document the medical effectiveness of combining Cherokee traditional knowledge with modern techniques. "Joseph," Evangeline said one evening as they worked by lamplight in their clinic, "regardless of what happens at the hearing, I want you to know that this partnership has been the most meaningful thing I've ever done with my life." Joseph looked up from the patient files he was organizing. "Evangeline, when we agreed to this forced marriage, I thought I was sacrificing my independence for social necessity. I never imagined I would find a true partner who could help me become a better healer and a better man." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Samuel Morrison dismounted from his horse and approached the clinic, with the hesitant steps of a man who wasn't certain of his welcome. "Evangeline, Joseph," her father said formally, "I've come to discuss the upcoming medical board hearing and what it means for our family's reputation in this community." Evangeline felt her stomach tightening as she prepared for another confrontation about social expectations and family honor. Her father's disapproval of her medical work had been a constant source of tension since her marriage to Joseph. But Samuel Morrison's next words surprised both of them completely. "I've been talking to the Mexican families who work on my ranch about their experiences with your medical care," he continued. "I've learned things about your healing work that I didn't understand before, and I've realized that my objections were based on prejudice rather than facts." He paused, clearly struggling with admissions that challenged everything he had believed about social hierarchies and cultural differences. "Evangeline, you've become a doctor who saves lives and serves people who need medical care. Joseph, you've proven your skill and dedication through years of competent medical practice. If the Territorial Medical Board threatens to destroy what you've built together, then I want to help you fight back." The offer of support from Samuel Morrison represented a crucial shift in the political balance surrounding their medical practice. As one of the most prominent ranchers in the region, his endorsement could influence other white community leaders who had been hesitant to oppose the Citizens Committee openly, but it also meant that the final confrontation at the medical board hearing would determine more than just Joseph and Evangeline's right to practice medicine. It would establish whether the territorial government would support innovation and cultural diversity or bow to pressure from those who demanded conformity to traditional social hierarchies. As December 15th approached, both sides prepared for a hearing that would reshape the future of frontier medical practice and determine whether love, partnership, and mutual respect could overcome prejudice, fear, and the desperate resistance of those who refused to accept that their world was changing forever. The Territorial Medical Board hearing convened in Austin on December 15, 1887, in a courtroom packed with supporters and opponents whose presence transformed a professional licensing review into a public trial of social change itself. Joseph and Evangeline Running Bear sat at the defendant's table, flanked by their attorney and Dr. Harrison Wells, while across the aisle, representatives of the Citizens Committee prepared to argue that Cherokee healing practices and women's medical participation threatened the safety and moral fabric of frontier communities. Judge William Garrett, serving as the hearing officer, called the proceedings to order with the gravitas befitting a decision that would establish precedent for medical practice throughout the territories. The formal charges against Joseph included practicing medicine through unscientific methods, incorporating primitive superstition, while Evangeline faced allegations of practicing medicine without proper credentials as a woman constitutionally unsuited for medical decision-making. The prosecution's case, presented by attorney Marcus Sullivan on behalf of the Citizens Committee, relied heavily on fear and prejudice rather than medical evidence. Sullivan painted Cherokee healing practices as dangerous witchcraft that endangered patients' souls and bodies, while characterizing Evangeline's medical work as an inappropriate violation of natural gender roles that God had established for human society. "Honorable members of the medical board," Sullivan declared in his opening statement, "we face a fundamental question about the nature of medical practice in civilized society. Are we to permit primitive superstitions to masquerade as legitimate medicine? Are we to allow unqualified women to experiment on vulnerable patients? The safety of our communities depends on maintaining proper standards for medical practice." Dr. Harrison Wells rose to present the defense, armed with 6 months of documented evidence about patient outcomes and treatment effectiveness. His presentation was methodical and compelling, demonstrating through statistical analysis that Joseph and Evangeline's combined approach produced superior results compared to conventional treatment methods. "Members of the board," Wells stated with professional authority, "the evidence shows conclusively that Cherokee traditional medicine, when properly integrated with modern medical techniques, enhances treatment effectiveness and improves patient outcomes. Mrs. Running Bear's medical skills, developed through intensive training and practical experience, exceed those of many formally credentialed physicians." The first day of testimony focused on medical evidence and expert opinions, with both sides presenting competing interpretations of treatment methods and patient results. But the real drama began on the second day, when patients themselves took the witness stand to describe their experiences with Cherokee healing practices and Evangeline's medical care. Maria Rodriguez testified first, her quiet dignity compelling as she described how Joseph and Evangeline had saved her life during Marcus Whitmore's assault and continued caring for her family despite threats and intimidation. Her testimony was translated for the board members, but her sincerity and gratitude transcended language barriers. "Dr. Running Bear and Doctora Running Bear," Maria said through the translator, "they saved my life when I was dying, and they saved my children when sickness came to our community. Their medicine works because it honors both modern knowledge and ancient wisdom. They are true healers who serve God by caring for all people." Rosa Delgado followed with testimony about her grandson's recovery from severe respiratory illness. Through Cherokee plant medicines after conventional treatments had failed, her weathered hands shook with emotion as she described watching her grandson's breathing improve after Joseph administered traditional remedies prepared according to Cherokee ceremonial protocols. "The Cherokee plant medicine," Rosa testified, "it worked like a miracle when the white doctor's medicine could not help. How can anyone say this is evil when it saved my grandson's life?" The Mexican family's testimony continued throughout the morning, each witness describing specific instances where Cherokee healing practices had provided effective treatment for conditions that conventional medicine couldn't address. Their collective testimony painted a picture of medical innovation that served underserved communities while respecting cultural traditions. But the prosecution's counterattack came through Reverend Marcus Whitfield, who testified that Cherokee healing ceremonies violated Christian principles and endangered participants' eternal souls. His testimony was designed to exploit religious fears about pagan practices infiltrating Christian communities. "These so-called healing ceremonies," Whitfield declared, "involve invoking spirits and powers that are fundamentally opposed to Christian faith. No matter what temporary physical benefits might result, the spiritual damage to participants' souls far outweighs any medical advantages." The religious objection to Cherokee healing practices represented the prosecution's strongest argument, appealing to deeply held beliefs about Christian civilization versus pagan superstition. Several board members nodded approvingly as Whitfield described Cherokee ceremonies as incompatible with Christian values. Joseph requested permission to respond to Reverend Whitfield's testimony, and his response revealed the depth of his understanding about both Cherokee spirituality and Christian theology. "Honorable board members," Joseph began, "Cherokee healing traditions honor the Creator's power expressed through plants and natural processes that were given to heal human suffering. Our ceremonies express gratitude for the Creator's gifts and request guidance in using them properly. These are not pagan rituals opposing Christian faith, but expressions of reverence for the same divine power that Christians worship." Joseph's theological argument surprised everyone in the courtroom, including Reverend Whitfield. By framing Cherokee healing practices as expressions of reverence for divine creation rather than opposition to Christian faith, Joseph challenged the fundamental assumption underlying religious objections to traditional medicine. Furthermore, Joseph continued, Cherokee healing traditions emphasize the healer's obligation to serve all people in need, regardless of their race or social position. This commitment to universal healing aligns perfectly with Christian teachings about caring for the sick and serving those who suffer. The theological defense of Cherokee healing practices shifted the debate from superstition versus science to different expressions of the same spiritual commitment to healing human suffering. Several board members who had seemed receptive to religious objections began reconsidering their positions. Evangeline was called to testify about her medical training and experience, facing questions designed to highlight her lack of formal credentials and challenge her competence to practice medicine. Her testimony would determine whether women could participate in frontier medical practice or be excluded, regardless of their demonstrated abilities. "Mrs. Running Bear," Attorney Sullivan began his cross-examination, "you have no formal medical degree, no certification from recognized medical institutions, and no training in the scientific principles that govern proper medical practice. How can you claim qualification to make life-and-death medical decisions? Evangeline's response drew on everything she had learned about medicine, leadership, and courage during her months of partnership with Joseph. Mr. Sullivan, I have 6 months of intensive medical training under the supervision of a skilled physician, documented success in treating dozens of patients, and demonstrated competence in surgical procedures that have saved lives. My qualifications come from proven ability to heal the sick and serve those in need, not from certificates issued by institutions that exclude women regardless of their capabilities. Her answer challenged the fundamental assumption that formal credentials were more important than demonstrated competence, particularly when those credentials were denied to entire groups based on prejudice rather than ability. But surely, Sullivan pressed, you acknowledge that medical practice requires knowledge and training that women's minds are not equipped to master. Evangeline's response was delivered with quiet confidence that commanded the courtroom's attention. Mr. Sullivan, I have mastered surgical techniques, pharmacological principles, and diagnostic methods that have enabled me to save lives and treat conditions that defeated other practitioners. If women's minds are not equipped for medical practice, how do you explain my documented success in healing patients and advancing medical knowledge? The question hung in the air as board members considered whether to accept evidence of medical competence or cling to prejudices about gender limitations that contradicted their own observations. Dr. Wells concluded the defense by presenting comparative statistics showing that Joseph and Evangeline's partnership produced patient outcomes superior to any individual medical practice in the territory. Their integration of Cherokee traditional knowledge with modern medical science had created an innovative approach that advanced the entire field of frontier medicine. Members of the board, Wells concluded, the evidence demonstrates that Dr. Running Bear and Mrs. Running Bear have developed medical practices that serve their community with exceptional effectiveness. Rejecting their methods would mean abandoning proven innovations that save lives and improve medical care for underserved populations. The board's deliberation lasted 3 hours, during which supporters and opponents waited anxiously for a decision that would establish precedent for medical practice throughout the territories. When Judge Garrett reconvened the hearing, his announcement would determine whether innovation and cultural diversity would be embraced or rejected by territorial authorities. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, Judge Garrett announced, "This board finds that Dr. Joseph Running Bear's integration of Cherokee traditional medicine with modern medical techniques represents legitimate medical innovation that enhances treatment effectiveness. His medical license will be renewed without restrictions." Joseph felt relief flooding through him, but the decision about Evangeline's medical practice would determine whether their partnership could continue. Regarding Mrs. Evangeline Running Bear, Judge Garrett continued, this board recognizes that her demonstrated medical competence exceeds formal credentialing requirements. However, territorial law requires medical practitioners to hold certificates from recognized medical institutions. Therefore, Mrs. Running Bear's medical authority is provisionally approved pending completion of formal medical education. The decision represented a compromise that validated Evangeline's medical abilities while acknowledging legal requirements for formal certification. Her acceptance to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania would provide the credentials needed to practice medicine legally while preserving the innovative partnership she had built with Joseph. As the hearing concluded, Joseph and Evangeline found themselves surrounded by supporters whose cheers celebrated more than just a legal victory. Mexican families, Cherokee community members, and even some white residents of Cedar Ridge had traveled to Austin to witness a decision that affirmed their right to medical care, that respected their cultural traditions and served their actual needs. Maria Rodriguez approached Evangeline with tears in her eyes. "Doctora, you and Dr. Running Bear, you show us that different people can work together to help everyone. You give hope that our children can have better lives." Samuel Morrison, who had testified on behalf of his daughter and son-in-law, embraced both of them with pride that had replaced his earlier disapproval. "Evangeline, Joseph, you've shown this community what real partnership can accomplish when people focus on serving others rather than maintaining artificial barriers." As they prepared to return to Cedar Ridge, Joseph and Evangeline reflected on how completely their forced marriage had transformed into something neither had imagined possible. Their partnership had not only survived external opposition, but had grown stronger through facing challenges that would have destroyed relationships based solely on romance or convenience. "Joseph," Evangeline said as their train departed Austin, "when I agreed to marry you to satisfy social conventions, I never imagined finding a true partner who would help me discover abilities I didn't know I possessed." Joseph took her hand, their fingers intertwining as they watched the Texas landscape pass outside their window. "Evangeline, our marriage began with duty and necessity, but it's become something much more valuable, a partnership based on shared purpose and mutual respect that has made both of us better than we could be alone." 6 months later, Evangeline departed for medical school with Joseph's full support and the promise that their clinic would continue serving Cedar Ridge until her return as a fully credentialed physician. Their separation would be difficult, but both understood that their partnership was strong enough to survive the temporary distance required for Evangeline to gain formal medical education. The Cherokee doctor and the ranch owner's daughter had proven that love could grow from respect, that partnerships forged in crisis could become foundations for lasting achievement, and that two people committed to serving others could overcome any obstacle that prejudice and fear might place in their path. Their story became legend in Cedar Ridge, inspiring future generations to believe that the most meaningful relationships are built not on passion alone, but on shared commitment to making the world better for everyone they touched. The rattlesnake bite that forced their marriage had led to a partnership that transformed an entire community's understanding of what was possible when different traditions worked together in service of healing and hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.